My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you are interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
On today's episode, we have Dr. Cindy Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman graduated from the New York College of Osteopathic Medicine in 1985 and completed both a family practice and dermatology residency by 1990. Dr. Hoffman's practice ranges from general dermatology to Mohs surgery and even cosmetic and laser treatments. She rounds out her busy schedule by acting as a dermatology residency director at St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx and is the course director of the dermatology department at the New York College of Osteopathic Medicine. In episode 19, we spoke with her about how DO students can be competitive for dermatology residency positions. Today, we will learn more about the competitive field of dermatology through her own private journey. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Dr. Hoffman, thank you again so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come talk with us today.
You're welcome, anytime.
So I guess I just wanted to start. You being the program director of a residency, you must be very busy in addition to your own practice. What does a normal day look like for you?
I do have my own practice. I have 3 offices. And so I wake up in the morning, and depending on the day, will depend on which office I'm going to. And I go into the office and I see patients in each of the offices. And I review charts and review mail and things like that. And then at the end of the day, I don't have my residents with me every single day. The residents kind of split their time between the hospital and my office. So when I'm with the residents, teaching besides seeing patients on my own as well. And when I'm not with the residents, I'm just seeing patients. And then at the end of the day, I'm not done yet because I run my own practice. I do have emails and mail that I have to open. So besides seeing patients, I'm also doing the business aspect of my office.
What about hospital work? Do you only go to the hospital some days?
So I do not go to the hospital. Another physician, the chairman of the department at St. Barnabas, actually runs the clinics at the hospital. So I just run my office. The residents rotate between my office and the hospital clinics with the other attending at the hospital. Now, I used to go to the hospital and I used to have clinics at the hospital as well. And that was probably about 10, 15 years ago. But the program kind of changed since then. We used to have 5 residents. So I used to run clinics at the hospital and do consults with the residents. And now we only have 3 residents. So my time is just strictly at the office and the other physician is just strictly at the hospital.
I understand. And do you kind of miss that hospital work a little bit, maybe?
You know, what I miss is the pathology that you see at the hospital because you see a lot of interesting cases at the hospital. But since as you kind of get older and I wanted to expand my office, there was no way for me to get back to the hospital because I can't really split my time between 3 offices and the hospital setting. I used to also work at Coney Island Hospital, and the residents used to rotate with me there. And that was also a great experience for the residents because, again, there's a lot of pathology at the hospital, which I really enjoyed. I do see pathology in my office, don't get me wrong, but it's just a different setting. And so now another attending kind of runs those clinics.
Definitely. These are some underserved areas that we're talking about. How did you get interested in all of this in the first place?
How did I get interested in medicine, or how did I get interested in running a program, or how did I get interested in doing dermatology?
Well, I want to talk about all of these. So let's start with medicine, I guess.
Okay, and as far as medicine, well, I actually went to college. I was a sociology major and music minor. And I never thought that I was going to ever go into medicine. It wasn't even on the radar. No one in my family was a physician. And I actually went to college thinking I was going to be a kindergarten teacher. My mother was a first grade teacher, and I love art and I love art projects. And I figured if I'm a kindergarten teacher, I can do that aspect. I like that aspect of being a kindergarten teacher, doing art projects and things like that. And also, it was close enough to being a first grade teacher, teaching them how to read and things like that. So I really had no interest in medicine. And then I decided after college to go for my master's in business administration. So I do have an MBA from George Washington University. And while I was doing my MBA, I actually worked doing EKGs at GWU Hospital. And while I was doing EKGs, I was in the hospital and I really enjoyed it. So I decided that, and at the time, I did have an ex boyfriend who was actually going into medicine. So at that time, I decided maybe I would like to go into medicine.
Wow. So it's kind of like we had one interview where the person talked about how it was similar. It wasn't on their radar at all. And it was like they were in a fog. And when they came out, they could see exactly the direction that they were going in. So when you came out of that fog and you knew that you were interested in medicine, did you know exactly what you wanted to do?
Well, it's funny that you asked that because I do remember when I was in the middle of getting my MBA, one of my friends came down to visit, and we both decided that we wanted to pursue something different. And I said to her, really randomly, let's apply to medical school, let's apply to dental school, let's apply to podiatry school. And in honesty, I really didn't know which direction I wanted to go. But I ended up applying to medical school and getting in. So that's the direction I went. As I said, nobody in my family was a physician. I had no idea. I was a sociology music, I went into that in college. And it was just, I guess I was kind of in a fog, as you would say. I really just decided to go in that direction and see if I could do it.
And when you were applying to these medical schools, did you apply to both allopathic and osteopathic schools or just one type?
I really did love the osteopathic philosophy, and I did apply to mostly osteopathic schools. I did apply to a couple of allopathic schools in New York, but my ex boyfriend at the time was going into medicine and did go to NICOM. So that's how I found out about NICOM. But what's really funny is when I was at GW and I was in Washington, I had done a lot of volunteering for my legislatures, the senators and congressmen. And I was invited to Reagan's inauguration on January 20th because I was so involved. And that same day was my NICOM interview. So I had to go to my NICOM interview.
Wow, must have been a busy day, huh?
I never got to go to the inauguration because I ended up having an interview at NICOM, and of course, that was more important.
Right. So I'm guessing that that person introduced you to the idea of osteopathic school. Was that your first interaction with it?
Yes, that was my first interaction with it. And I also did love the philosophy of osteopathic medicine. So that's why I mainly applied to osteopathic schools.
I understand. And how did you get interested in dermatology while you were in medical school?
Well, while I was in medical school, I was actually more interested in psychiatry, and I did a rotation at Long Island Jewish in psych. And I did love psychiatry. And then I started doing some dermatology rotations, and I did like that even more. My mother had psoriasis. I, like most teenagers, had acne. So I always went to a dermatologist, and I always used to bring my mother to a dermatologist. And I just happened to fall in love with that field.
Were there any extracurriculars or any clubs, any research that you were involved with in medical school that pushed you in that direction a little bit?
Well, while I was in medical school, I worked at the NICOM library to make some extra money because I did have loans to take out that I took out. And I also like being involved in different organizations. So I got involved in the Student Osteopathic Medical Association. I was on some of the committees. Then I became editor of the SOMA newsletter and magazine. And then I actually became national president of SOMA. So while I was national president of SOMA, I went around to different conferences and conventions and things like that. And I met different people and I talked to different people. And also, kind of knowing about the field of dermatology, I decided that I don't know what really kind of pushed me in that direction. I think it was probably the rotations and the fact that in dermatology, there's just so much variety. You do a little medicine, you do a little surgery, and I really like that. I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many ways to branch out with dermatology, more than some people actually believe. What about rotations? Did you get to do any rotations in dermatology and psychiatry? How did you end up balancing what you wanted to do?
Yeah, so, back then the school was only 4 years old and we really didn't have any rotations in New York. We had very, very few. There were just a couple of hospitals that allow us to do rotations. And most of my friends, actually, most of us, actually, for all of our many of our rotations, had to leave New York. I did OBGYN in Pennsylvania. I did surgery and medicine in New Jersey. And then I ended up doing a dermatology rotation in New Jersey. And once I did my dermatology rotation, I really fell in love with it.
Wow. I wanted to move on to your residency. I know that you told me that there were no dermatology residencies back then per se. Can you tell me about what happened there?
Yeah, sure. Back then, for the osteopathic students, there was really only one residency in the country, and that was in Michigan. And there were only a couple of spots available. And because of that, we created, or the organization of dermatology, the college, created what we call preceptorships. Preceptorships is when a student and now resident rotated with a dermatologist for 3 years and just worked with one dermatologist for 3 years. And that's what was available during that time, just preceptorships. So a lot of my friends had done a preceptorship. There were no real residency programs. Plus, it was really impossible to get into an allopathic dermatology residency, which were hospital based. And so there were no preceptorships in New York. And I wanted to stay in New York. And the AOA had allowed us to develop our own preceptorship. So I found a doctor in New Jersey, the same doctor that I had rotated with as a student. And I asked him if he would be my preceptor. And I created a program with that physician to have a preceptorship for dermatology.
Wow, so it sounds like you really paved your own way when there was no other option available.
I did. I had no choice. I kind of had to. But I also, when I created this preceptorship, I kind of had the best of both worlds because in the osteopathic profession, it was the residents were kind of working in an office. And in the allopathic profession in dermatology, the residents were working in a hospital. So what I created for myself is a combination of both. I worked with this preceptor in his office, and I also worked at Coney Island Hospital in the hospital. So I kind of got the best of both worlds.
And was it only just you in this preceptorship? Were there any other residents that came with you or after you?
It was just me in this preceptorship because I developed it, and it was just one person. That most of the preceptorships were just one, at the most two people, and there was only one resident after me that went through this preceptorship. Preceptorships ended right after I ended my program. The preceptorships kind of ended in 19 I finished my program in 1990, and I think they ended in 91 or 92.
Wow, that's amazing. So I guess for, the future dermatologist, if you had to choose between kind of a large or small institution and private or public institution for training, how would you advise them to choose?
Well, it's difficult. I was the only resident, so it was difficult for me because when you're the only resident, you have to really discipline yourself. You have to discipline yourself to study and seeing patients with one other attending. And it's much easier if you're in a bigger program where you have other residents to kind of bounce things off of, and you work with multiple attendings, and you have a chief resident above you. So it's a little bit easier in that regard. But then if you're the only resident, you get to do everything. So it's kind of which direction you feel most comfortable in.
So it sounds like you were the intern and the senior at the same time.
I certainly was. I was the intern and the senior.
So that probably made for a really unique experience, I would say.
Yeah, it did. And I really did get to do a lot. I'm not saying that it was the best way, but back then it was really the only way. And I was so dedicated to becoming a dermatologist. That's what you had to do.
Do you have any stories from residency that I'm sure are amazing, but do you have any stories that come to mind being, yourself as the only resident?
For me in particular, I don't have any stories, but I will tell you that a couple of my friends, being the only resident, I have one person who did their program in the Midwest, and his preceptor went on vacation, and he was left alone to do a surgery in the office. And he had his patient lie on his stomach. He was telling me the story. And then he had a book on the Mayo stand, and he was kind of reading how to take out a cyst while a patient was on his stomach. I mean, this is, I'm not bragging about this. This is not the best way to learn, but this is the kind of things that some of the preceptees had to do while they were training. Fortunately, my preceptor was with me at all times, so I didn't have that kind of training.
Wow, that's really cool. So, how was your experience after that? Did you get a job right out of residency?
It's very easy for dermatologists to get a job out of residency, and I did. As I mentioned in my residency, I was at Coney Island Hospital, and I did work for a dermatologist right near the hospital. And then after a year, I had my daughter. She was my first. And St. Barnabas at that time was looking to start a program because, as I mentioned, preceptorships had dwindled down, and I think they were no longer after 1992 and 1991. And so residencies were starting to pop up, and St. Barnabas wanted to start a residency. And since I developed my own program as a resident, I really wanted to start a residency program because I wanted residents to get the kind of opportunity that I didn't get, such as being with other residents. And also, I did a non-funded residency preceptorship program. And most of my friends were non-funded. The preceptorships back there were not funded. And so being in a hospital-based program and starting a residency program for other residents would afford them to have funding at least.
So, what you're telling me is that you went through residency or your preceptorship unpaid for those 3 years.
Correct. I went through my preceptorship non-funded. The way I made money is before I started my dermatology residency, I did a year of family medicine. Back then, family medicine was your year of internship and a year of family medicine. So I am boarded in family medicine. And as a family medicine resident, we had to work 2 nights in the emergency department in the rapid room. They called it the rapid room, where we saw just basic stuff. So a basic trauma, somebody spraying their finger, rashes, things like that, colds, coughs. So when I was a resident in dermatology, I continued my work 2 nights a week in the emergency department to make money so that I can live because we were non-funded.
Wow, that's amazing dedication. So, how did you balance all this with your lifestyle? And how do you balance it to this day? I'm sure you're very busy, being the program director. And even when you were first starting out, you just started residency and you had a child. How did you balance all this?
I can't say it's easy. It really is difficult. There was a time, and besides running the residency and having kids, there was a time between 2000 and 2003 where I started my own practice in 2000. And I was also the residency director. And I had 3 kids. And I became president of my dermatology college, the American Osteopathic College of Dermatology. And so during those years, it was really crazy. Every day I would go to work, I'd run the residency, and then at night I would do all my work for being involved in the organization. But I really did love it. And I can't even believe during that time, I really didn't have too much time for myself. But I did it because I just loved giving back to the profession. And I always like being busy.
Wow, that's amazing. And here I am thinking that I'm too busy during my fourth year doing nothing else.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, medical school, you're really busy too, trust me.
So, like you said, you had a part a residency in family medicine while you were doing the preceptorship, and I know you said you did take loans for medical school. Can you tell us about, we don't have to get too personal, but how did finances ever affect your choice? Did you ever have a thought in your mind that maybe you should do something else if it pays more because of how many loans you have? And do you have any advice for students, that are worried about the cost of education?
Yes, you know, I did have loans, but my parents did help me with rent. And I did do a non-funded residency, but I was able to offset that by working in the emergency department 2 nights a week. And I just loved dermatology. There was no way I was going to do anything different. And I figured at some point in the future, I was going to probably make enough money to pay back the loans, which I actually did. Believe it or not, we ended up refinancing 10 years after first of all, loans were able to be paid off within 10 years. For me, I actually refinanced my house to finish paying off my loans. But you have to realize tuition back then was 10,500 and it didn't go up much from that. So I was able to pay them back.
Wow, I'm very jealous when I hear that number.
My son currently, he is a resident. He went to NICOM and he had to take out loans. And I know that the tuition's much higher now and he had to take out more loans. But at some point, he'll be able to pay them back. I mean, it might take you 10 years to pay them back, but you'll be able to do it.
So, do you think that finances should ever play a role in deciding what specialty that someone might want to pursue?
I don't think so because in any specialty you go into, you'll eventually be able to pay back your loans. I think that you really need to do what you love to do. And I've been in practice for 30 years and I still love doing what I do every day. Otherwise, it would be difficult getting up in the morning and going to work. So if you love what you do, then it's not like working.
I think that's great advice. Thank you. Do you think that your MBA helped at all with that process?
I don't know. Other people tell me they think it did, but I don't know about that. I'm not really sure. I really did go for my MBA because I was interested in business. I've always been good in business, and that's why I run my own practice and I'm not part of a group. But whether my MBA helped out or not, it's difficult to say. It might have just been what I've always read about or knew about. And I can't say that. I mean, I guess it helped somewhat, but I don't know how much it helped.
Do you think it helped at all for the business aspect of opening up your own clinics at all?
I think I was just always interested in that and always had a good sense of that. So I think that's what helped more than anything. But it doesn't ever hurt to go further in your education.
I agree. Can you tell us a little bit about owning clinics? A lot of students, have this in mind, and can you tell us some of the pros and cons of owning your own clinic?
So I don't call it a clinic. We call the hospital clinics. It's my own practice. I love owning my own practice because I get to do what I want in the practice. I hire my own staff. If I decide that I want pharmaceutical companies to come in and leave samples for my patients, they're able to do that. A lot of the other dermatologists in the area have joined groups. I am not particularly interested in joining a group because then you're really not your own person. I didn't go into medicine to have an administrator tell me how to run my practice, tell me how to see patients. I like the fact that I am able to have samples in my office, and patients love the fact that I can give them samples. I know some of my friends don't have samples in their office or their practice because it's not allowed. So I do love it. You have to be willing to do the business part of it. You have to be willing to deal with the staff. And there's a lot more to just do, seeing patients. It's running a business.
I understand. That makes perfect sense. Can you tell us what made you really successful throughout this journey? Like, do you have a superpower?
I think that I've always been seen whatever I got involved in. So, for instance, I didn't decide that I'm going to one day be president of the American Osteopathic College of Dermatology, or be president of the New York State Osteopathic Medical Society, or be president of the NICOM Alumni Association. And I was president of all of them. And it's not that I had this idea that one day I'm going to be president. I just always loved being involved in the profession, and I always just loved being involved. And so I always used to go to committee meetings. I always used to go to events, and I always used to be seen at these events. And people used to say, "Who's that person?" And because I always was involved, and because of that, by the time I had already worked in all these different committees, and I was a trustee and things like that. One of the past presidents of the OCD said, "We're going to nominate you for third vice presidents, and you better say yes." And so this is what led me into that direction, just always being seen and always being involved.
Wow, absolutely amazing. Absolutely. So, I wanted to ask about your practice a little more.
Okay.
Being a DO, right? We go through this whole training of OMM. Is that something that you find that you can incorporate into your practice?
Yes. And I do love OMM, and we always adhere to osteopathic principles. The problem with me personally is when the school was only 4 years old, and that's when I entered the school, and we didn't have rotations in New York, as many rotations in New York. And most of the physicians that were training us were MDs. We learned OMM in our first 2 years, but then to bring it out into the clinic area and learn how to actually do OMM in the clinics was difficult because I didn't have any mentors teaching me how to do it. Now it's a different story. There are a lot of DOs in these hospitals that are able to teach. So it's much easier now for you to actually perform OMM on patients. But my residents, when they want to perform OMM on a patient, I actually encourage it. I think it's wonderful. It's great. It's just I personally don't do it. I just adhere to the principles.
I understand. You mentioned that a lot of the people that train you were MDs. We asked this question to all our interviewees. Do you think that your path would have been easier or better if you were an allopath rather than an osteopath?
I actually think my path was easier and better as a DO because DOs knew each other. It was a small group, a small community. And everywhere I went, it was just everybody knew each other. And so I don't think if I was an MD, I would have been president of my allopathic organization because when I got involved, I everybody knew who I was, and they steered me into the direction of, "Oh, you should be president because you're so involved." I don't think that would have happened as an MD. I really love being a DO, and I love that camaraderie that the DOs have.
I think that's a great point. The DO community is often very tight knit, I feel like.
Yes, absolutely.
I wanted to switch gears and talk a little about the profession of dermatology. I remember one of our previous interviewees told us that their dad wanted them to become a dermatologist on Park Avenue when he was like 5 years old. A lot of these people view dermatology as kind of like a golden specialty and want to do it because of the lifestyle and the prestige rather than love for the field. People think that it's kind of a 9 to 5 workday with great earning ability. Do you think that this is true? And what are your thoughts on people that have these thoughts rather than love for the field?
Well, most people that I know do have love for the field. For me, it's not a 9 to 5 job because I'm running my own practice. So, yes, even though I might be seeing patients from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, I'm still on call 24/7 for all my patients, even though there's not a lot of call. But there are patients that do call and have problems. I also have employees. I also run a business. So I'm always taking care of bills and running my practice. So it's not just a 9 to 5 job. Now, I guess if you work for a group or a corporation, I guess you can set your own hours. That is true. But you can do that in other fields as well. I don't know. I know what you're talking about and I've heard this, but I just love the field because I love the field, not because of anything else.
I agree. And I think that's the way it should be for every field.
It should be that for every field because if you love what you do, you won't stop doing what you love. And my son, I did not try to sway him to do dermatology, even though it would have been nice for somebody to take over my practice, but he wanted to do emergency medicine. He loves emergency medicine. And I'm sure he'll do it for many years. And, who knows, in a couple of years, if he did dermatology, he might have been bored with it after a couple of years.
Definitely, definitely. And I remember when I was talking to him, that was one of the things I said to him. I give him a lot of respect for that because there's definitely a lot of people out there who would have taken the easy way out. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference in dermatologists who do primarily cosmetics and those in academics?
Yeah. Most dermatologists do both, as I do as well. I do mostly general dermatology. I do have cosmetics in my office. I do fillers. I do Botox. I have laser hair removal. I do cool sculpting. And, that is a small part of my practice, maybe about 10 to 15% of my practice. I do mostly general derm. And most people in dermatology either do more general derm and a little cosmetics or more cosmetics and a little general derm. There are some people that do all cosmetics, and that's their choice. They prefer that. I find it more interesting to do a combination, and I feel that patients really, really need you to see them for their skin cancers and their acne and their rashes. And yes, they also need fillers and Botox to make them feel good, but I really like the variety of everything.
Thank you. I just have one final question. You've given us a lot of great advice already so far, but what was the best piece of advice that you got throughout your education, anytime that you always think of and would pass on to other students?
Again, love what you do because then you'll always love what you do and you won't stop doing what you love. That is the best advice I can give anybody. I've had candidates who want to dermatology really love dermatology, but it's very difficult to get in. And I said, don't stop trying. Do everything you can. Do a year of research, work in an office for a year, do as much as you can to get into the field that you want to get into.
I think, once again, that's the best advice anyone could get. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Hoffman. I know you're very busy.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there is someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tianyu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.